Hello and welcome to the latest Viva Cost podcast. My name is Graham Spence and tonight I'm joined by Alison Graham. Hello, Alison.
Hi Graham, how are you? Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you too. It's our first time that we've recorded in 2023.
Yes.
Having obviously had a very successful year in 2022. And I think today we're going to have a chat about that, aren't we?
Yep, I think it's always good to reflect and review and see what worked. We talk about this a lot, what worked, what didn't work, and learn from that. And I think New Year's always a kind of traditional time to be able to reflect and review on what's past and look towards the future and see what, if anything, you would do differently, or what new goals or new bars you want to set for yourself. So yeah, I think that's a very appropriate time, I think, to be having this conversation.
Here we are. So I guess we should start with, where are we? Like, what have we learned over 20? I think the last big event, the last keystone event we had was the 2021 election, which elected the Scottish Government with a manifesto for independence. And the people of Scotland were finally going to have their say, and that was to be in October of 2023. Suffice it to say, I don't think we're going to have that referendum, given that I've now booked a holiday for October, knowing that I probably won't be needed at a polling station on that day. And then we've gone from electing that government and the sort of green coalition government that we got through that, and we've got the Greens have had a wee bit of success, I suppose, in their manifesto, because we've got the Gender Recognition Act getting battered through Parliament as though it's the greatest emergency known to man, or woman, or, I'm not going to make a joke because I'll get cancelled before I even get going. But they've got the legislators' bottle scheme, for the plastic bottles and the glass bottles. That's gone through Parliament, and from the wider industry, I hear that's a total shambles as well. So we've managed these two pieces of domestic legislation. We've recovered from COVID in the sense of, well, we don't really talk about it anymore, although I did notice there's some winter vaccination programme that's suddenly kicked up in January. The NHS is in absolute chaos, the police is in chaos, the justice system's in chaos, the weather's in chaos. There's chaos all about. We're now in perma-crisis. And then we moved on from that, didn't we?
Yeah, that's the new phrase, isn't it? Perma-crisis. But where to start, really? How to make any sense of the chaos. And something I think the chaos is deliberate. It's to keep us so head spinning that we don't get a chance to actually sit down and work out each of the problems and see what the kind of root cause of a lot of the problems are. That's one thing I think Commonweal do very well, that they do tend to really get to the root of the causes of problems and try and work out solutions that are going to be sustainable, which is kind of like a buzzword, but sustainable. What I mean is it's things that will work and will grow with the population. And there's a big thing I keep coming back to. It's something that Craig Dale had mentioned before, about future neutral democracy, which is quite hard to say. Future neutral democracy. And I think that is something that I keep coming back to when I see some of the things that are being done at the moment by a Scottish Government that are, supposed to be taking us to independence. They seem to be trying to pre-can a lot of the solutions. And that's not really, well, two things. One, that's not really their job. Their job, absolutely, they're in government, in a devolved government in Holyrood, to keep the train on the tracks, as it were. Probably not a good thing with train strikes going on, but a good kind of analogy. But also to ultimately, the reason that I would suggest the majority of people voted for the SNP was to deliver on independence. So to do that, that's really difficult when you are, trying to make an independence that is, forged in your policies, because you then, it's a pretty naive position if your goal really is independence. If your goal is party dominance and a devolved administration, then that's different. But if your goal is independence, then you need to make that as appealing to as cross, section of society as possible. And there will be people, across the board who, support the principle of independence or are becoming less, negative towards it, if you've seen in some of the polling, over the last few months. But how that then translates into political seats, I think, is a bit misleading because, you've got people within the Labour Party. So we've talked before about plebiscite elections. How does plebiscite elections work for Labour voters who actually are pretty amenable to independence? Do you categorise that as a no vote for independence, or do you categorise that as a maybe vote for independence? So I think it's really difficult to unpick a lot of these layers, and I think that's something that's going to become a lot more evident in 2023, because there's a lot of people have been, they talk about being marched up the hill and marched back down again. There's a lot of people that are still, looking at social media, still holding the SNP to 2023. And hoping against hope that, they have got a secret plan and they'll pull something out of a bag. And then I think you've got other people that are saying this is your last chance, fool us once, what have you. But, you were put in position to do something. So I think 2023 is going to be a really difficult year for the SNP. And I've not seen any evidence of them having a humble attitude to that. I think there's been an entrenched digging deep arrogance, to be honest, from a lot of the kind of behaviours I've seen just recently. You talked about the GRR bill. Some of the things like Roddy Dunlop, Dean of the Faculty of Advocate, has been blocked by Joe Fitzpatrick, who was the chair of the Equalities Committee, who was on the bill. That seems really extreme. It does again worry me about something that I've seen for a while, which is this kind of what I would call lazy legislators devolving the responsibility to lobbyists. I think we've now got people, devolving, elected members devolving their judgment to block lists. I mean, you've got people who come on saying, I've been blocked by an elected member. I've never met them in my life. I've never interacted with them in my life. And that's a pretty bad look for an elected member, particularly when you're trying to say, come all, come many, engaged in Scotland's future. But only if you, agree with me. You don't even know whether people agree with you if you don't interact with them.
A lot of that comes down to, though, the Scottish Government, they would say they're being big and they're being bold and they're having, they're getting involved in legislation that is at the bleeding edge of current thought. The only problem with that is it by default is quite controversial legislation. It's by default the more difficult parts of the legislation to get right. There's not very much international experience to pick upon. There's not very much. And I think that flies in the face to a lot of what we do, because in Scottish independence we've always had a propensity to almost copy other European countries or other Nordic countries and say, this has worked really well for these people, we should copy that here. And then all of a sudden we've flipped to a model of, well, we're going to establish international best practice. And then you say, on what basis? Who defines international best practice? And it turns out that we just made it up.
Well, do you know the thing? This is another thing that really bothers me. I think there tends to be a focusing on what other people have got as a result without really scrutinising the process they got there. Because it's often said the journey is as important as the destination, and it's something I've always felt about independence. How we get there, what we learn on that way is really important. Now, if you look at the controversial GRR bill from the pre-Christmas holiday and how it made Parliament sit late. So it broke Parliament's ideals of being a family-free Parliament, an accessible Parliament, all sorts of bad publicity it could really have done without. And it looks as if it will rumble on. And there'll be at least, a few challenges to that. Not least, I think there's consideration from the UK government to look at Section 35 of the Scotland Act, and there's nothing to stop other organisations. I mean, I think it was like the Christian Institute or something that challenged the Named Person Bill, for example. It wasn't a government that did it.
I think the Christian Institute. I mean, I don't mean to offend any of our viewers or listeners, but I mean, the Christian Institute to me is one of those bonkers organisations that exists that just, exists in a stone age that doesn't exist anymore. And even I read some of their submissions, especially on named persons and GRR and things like that. I read the Christian Institute submission and I thought either I've joined the Stone Age, which, could entirely be possible, or they make a lot of sense. So it shows, I don't have any sort of adversity to the Christian Institute. I think they do what they do, and, in certain things I would happily ignore them. But they've come up with some good and salient points. There's things going forward from it. We seem to have hit, especially in GRR, it's supposed to be a bill. I think, what was I don't want to get the exact quote wrong, so it was a similar quote. It was, I think Shona Robson stood up and said this bill doesn't give any new rights. It shouldn't be controversial. It doesn't. So for something that shouldn't be that controversial, it certainly seemed to be quite controversial. So it shows me that, someone standing up and announcing this should not be controversial doesn't particularly...
No, it's a little bit like Brexit already deal. You can say that, doesn't mean it's true.
Is this the Scottish Parliament? I mean, there was a lot of easy things for the Scottish Parliament. There was a lot, they came in and they done free education for Scotland. They done the council tax freeze. They done quite well with their budgets. They had quite a good understanding that the cost of providing prescription management was actually costing almost as much as it does just to give the prescription out for free. There's a sort of there's that random statistic that goes around Facebook every sort of winter. It's like, if you're going to go to your doctor for paracetamol, it's 32 pence in Asda, not £10 via the NHS. The truth is the NHS doesn't pay £10 for paracetamol. The NHS pays the same 20, 15 pence that you could pay. The problem is, you need to see a doctor because you're not entirely sure of why if you do just have a headache, take paracetamol. But if you think you've got something seriously wrong with you, the £10 is actually the consultation. Yeah. And I've seen there's been a lot of nonsense going online now saying that doctors don't want to see patients and such, which isn't true because the doctors are actually paid per patient. So they do want to see patients. It's not certainly the business model of doctors in Scotland. The NHS, there's very few NHS doctors. They're all private practice. They all want to see more and more NHS patients because it's a bigger amount of money. The problem we've got is, the Scottish Government is now trying to manage decline of the NHS. It's trying to manage an overwhelmed A&E that's, told everybody not to turn up for 2 years. It's got the COVID backlog because we never bothered to do anything else during COVID. We're now, people who would have gone to the NHS during COVID and the subsequent reopenings didn't, and therefore everything they're turning up with now, what was a wonky knee or was a sore bit in their stomach when they ate something, is now a very serious condition, and that's having to get managed through the NHS on an emergency basis, which sucks in all the resources. The outcomes have got worse, the staff are overwhelmed, and then we come back to, COVID's getting the blame, and COVID does share a huge proportion of the blame, and certainly some of the overreaction, to the point that NHS, things were cancelled so that we had to deal with this virus, and there was things like physiotherapists saying, well, like the best will in the world, I'm not going to get deployed into the ICU to deal with intubation, so they should have kept that going. But Brexit has been allowed to get away with the fact that our NHS has 32% less staff in it than it did in 2018.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. It's the NHS staff is the people. Fundamentally, it's the people, it's the resources. That is what makes the NHS what it is. And COVID, as a global pandemic, was an event. The decisions that were made, and the political decisions particularly that were made during COVID, you can say it was an unexpected event, you have to deal with things as best as you can. But there didn't seem to be a lot of learning as we went through. And I think this is the big problem we've been left with. We've been left with, I said at the time, during COVID, actually, during lockdown, I had a lot of friends that worked in the NHS. Some of them were working in COVID wards through the whole time in ICU, which was a horrific experience. And, both them and kids and teachers and anybody really on the front line. I lost a couple of friends who were on the front line during COVID. but people who came through it and survived, and families and stuff, and looking at kids, particularly, I've got 2 kids who are in high school. Every single child, every frontline worker should have been considered as a baseline as having, additional support requirements, whether it's additional support needs through school or understanding of, when you work on adrenaline for so long, it kind of normalizes, and it is really excessively bad for your system. So you've got people who literally hit a wall. And there's a lot of people, through, family, being in hospitals and different things and speaking to different NHS staff, there's so many people who are so committed, but they're done. They're absolutely done in. And so we've got the double whammy of Brexit, Scotland being a country that needs immigration, being forced into a hostile immigration situation by the UK government, who, are doing it from an ideological point of view. And we've also got people who are absolutely battered by the experience that they've been through. And, they're the ones that are needing support. We've talked a bit about mental health support and stuff before. There really is very little. There's a lot of complex things, as you said, whether it's physical complex things or, a combination, or mental health, or a bit of both. These are complex things. These are not things that are fixed by a tablet or, a plaster or what have you. This is stuff that takes intense resource. And that is something that when you're in a crisis situation, you are patching and pushing back out the door. You are trying to free up beds, because you're trying to say constantly, it is like a war situation. The triage was actually invented during the First World War. When you actually assessed, is this person going to survive or not? If not, we're not going to focus on them. We're going to so there's no empathy and end of life care. It's things are belt and braces down to, and even during, I remember seeing during a lot of the coverage of Italy during COVID before it really hit here badly, where we got none of this coverage. But, this is Italy, particularly the north of Italy, very, very good NHS, very good health system. And they were losing losing so many doctors and so many patients, and all the kind of horrific scenes of, people in the car park and there was no oxygen and they were running out of oxygen and all sorts of things. And they were having to make decisions of, saying, who's more worthy of the oxygen we've got left? I mean, when you've got finite resources, and this is something I think we need to kind of explore more on Viva Cost podcast as we go through, because there's a few things that I've been reading, I won't go into so much tonight, but that people are talking about, we kind of briefly touched on GRR, but self-ID. A lot of things are about, finite resources and where priorities lie. And this is a big danger when you start getting into the kind of self-declaration aspect of that. Your judgment, if you've got something that's a medical thing particularly, I would strongly suggest somebody who is a medical consultant has got more insight into, what you need than maybe you do, because you're comparing, what you've kind of self-assessed. They're looking at the resources they've got and how they allocate that. And you see it in
we make that argument. So let's hold these two things together. It's quite odd that we can pull gender and COVID together, but why not? We're on the Viva Cost podcast. That's what we do here. But let's go into that. Let's explore what you've just said. So the GRR effectively removes the medical personnel from the decision making. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep. So that removes the medical personnel. With COVID, which is still a thing, as much as we've parked COVID, it isn't parked in the sense you can't get it. You still can absolutely get it. We've done away with testing, so the public can't get tests anymore, which may or may not be a bad thing. Personally, I don't think living your life testing every time that you've got a sore throat is going to particularly get you there. However, there's also a drug called Paxlovid, or Pax. It's like Paxlovid or something. And in America, you can get it same day if you've got COVID. You can get Paxlovid the same day, and you only need to have the symptoms. And I actually think you can walk into a pharmacy and get it, and if not a pharmacy, you could probably get it at like CVS, Walgreens, things like that. You walk in, you get Paxlovid, you take your 5-day course, and it sort of kills COVID for you. It helps you get over it. In the UK, we have the drug. You can get prescribed it inside a medical facility, usually not your doctors, because they'll tell you if you've got the symptoms of COVID, stay home. But you can certainly get it if you're in hospital, and you can be given Paxlovid. Now, the interesting thing is, on something as simple as, here, take this drug to stop COVID, which is currently causing chaos everywhere, we've deigned it that there must be a medical professional gets involved there. And Paxlovid's not a life-altering drug. It's not it certainly doesn't change your gender, it certainly doesn't change your entire life. And yet we've said a medical professional is required for your 5-day course of a COVID drug, but now medical intervention isn't required for, the whole GRR thing. And I think that it comes down to who in government is, like, what is the gatekeeping? What is the process? What is the analysis here? What risk analysis are we doing? Because it seems, as much as we go on about, we will protect our NHS, and, I will, rocks will melt and doors will fly and Scotland will never have a private NHS and such. The interesting thing is, if you look at the private health systems, of which there are many to look at, and you look at some of those private health systems, things like bed blocking are not actually an issue. And the reason bed blocking is not an issue is because in America, quite frankly, no insurance company will stump up the money to keep somebody in the hospital waiting on social care at home. It just, the whole idea that the most expensive way to hold someone, the most expensive hotel in the UK, is holding someone hostage in a hospital waiting for their home care to exist. So by the time you take, you take a, what was it, 28% staff reduction because of Brexit, and by the time you increase bed blocking by double or whatever nonsense it's gone up by, we look at that, we look at things that we could intervene on, like Strep A's been hammering about, but we've made no antibiotics, there's no community sentinel kind of testing and sentinel. There was talk of it, there was talk of going into schools that had high Strep A. The public is in a frenzy, which, I mean, the odd thing is Strep A's been a thing for 20, 30 years. It's not a new disease. Unfortunately, some children did die, but they have always died of it. It's never just, but we've become...
But it's a public health
sensitive.
notification. It's a public health notification. And it's back to your testing. If it's not notified, people don't know, and the vulnerable get it. And
Exactly.
Personal story: my dad had Strep A. We were never told. Somebody else in the care home had died from it, and it wasn't until my dad,
Jeez.
went into. I had to phone the ambulance for my dad when he went into hospital, and that was, there's, let's just say, there's a lot of issues in the care service as well, and
Exactly. But
negligence.
it comes down to Strep A should not be killing people in the UK because
Not if
we
you
have antibiotics.
Yes, but not if you don't take action on it. That's the thing, and that's why.
That's what I mean.
But you look back. I'm a big fan of Call the Midwife. It's back on screen watching New Year's Day, and back, all joking apart, back in the day, they often do things about polio, the polio vaccines, and how they got totally across the vaccination programs. And this is before they had computerized systems. It was like file systems, what have you, and populations that were, often is they're just set in a very poor area of urban London, and like people coming in like from the Commonwealth, and language problems and what have you, and they managed to do it then. So really there is very little excuse for government and policies not being able to be done now. And I do really think it kind of comes back, as always, to kind of come back full circle, it comes back to the way we do things and how we tackle problems and how we learn from them. And again, just to kind of tangentially jump back to GRR, what we talked about at the beginning, one of my biggest disappointments is that was a real opportunity to show Scotland doing things differently with participatory democracy that had always been, the kind of, the little shining light over the horizon. The Scottish Government had legislated for a Citizens' Assembly. It looked so forward, thinking that's progressive politics. That's progressive democracy. It's not about your policies. It's about your procedure to get there. It's about how you engage the population, how you are touching base, how you are kicking the tyres of your argument so that you are assured, like other countries you see, like Ireland we've looked at, and other areas like Switzerland who use participatory democracy for big changes. Ireland have changed their constitution, on same-sex marriage and abortion, from a Citizens' Assembly that is then ratified in a national referendum, which I think with the abortion one came within 1% of the final Citizens' Assembly poll. I think they came within, their representative group clearly proved how representative they were, because the final poll really was so close. I'm sure it was within about 1%. So that to me is a massively missed opportunity. We could be in a completely different place here. What the outcome of that would be, to be honest, it would have been democratic. Regardless of what the outcome was, we would have truly got a position on the people of Scotland. And I think we would have come to a place of balance, of balanced rights and protections. I think we would have removed the toxicity from the whole debate and the polarisation of the whole debate. And I think we would have avoided the Scottish Government looking as if they were, strong-arming through a majority that they created through an agreement with the Greens, that we all thought was because they were independence parties, that they are pushing through something that nobody that I know from independence supporters can understand why that was the bill to be controversial with. If you want the UK government to come after you in a legal challenge, make it about independence. Rally people behind the call.
Make it the right on there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, the Supreme Court challenge was talked about before, but did the Lord Advocate approve this bill? And if that gets pulled down, what does that say about the Lord Advocate's reputation? Why wasn't a preemptive, reference to the Supreme Court made about this bill? And if that was the case, on the flip side, why was the preemptive reference made about the independence referendum bill? With a majority, they could have pushed through that bill, no problem. From a backbench.
Here's a theory. I got told one of my SNP friends told me that Nicola Sturgeon actually isn't for the GRR bill, so she's personally hoping it's going to fail, having done all she can to push it forward. She's hoping for a legal challenge that beats it.
I find that odd, considering, what we know about a lot of the push, that's where it's come from. I don't think if you put most people in an individual room and ask them their honest opinion, many people would be happy with the way this bill's been done. I don't think anybody can be comfortable. And the fact that people are I mean, some of them, post it were being so obtuse in some of the stuff that they put out, this self-congratulatory, clapping to one side of a gallery just looks entirely polarised. The optics are dreadful. And if that's an inclusive parliament, then they're really not doing themselves any justice.
Did the lady with the fake vagina in the gallery, did anything, I heard that they were investigating that. Yes, did anything come of that?
I don't believe so, but I mean, a pair of leggings with, Vivienne Westwood would have been arrested if that was the case. I've seen her wearing things like that. Really, it's
One last thing to kind of tie it up, because it's not all bad with the Scottish Government. One of the things they announced, again, it was intermingled with the nonsense of COVID, was pharmacy first, which is where for people, there's some people who just love to see their GP. I'm not one of them. I would quite happily deal with the receptionist if I thought it would get me through the system quicker. It doesn't bother me. They came up with pharmacy first, and the idea was you could go and see your pharmacist and they could kind of dispense things to you that previously they couldn't, and therefore, would be a couple of steps forward, and it would release the pressure on NHS. That is a good policy. It just, again, to the same point. For example, I've got eczema, and occasionally I get skin infections when it's cold. It's too dry. My skin can't normally kind of rehydrate on my hands. Then I pick up an infection in my hand, and I need a steroid cream to clear it. I get this steroid cream probably once a year, and I've done so for once a year for God knows how many years of my life now. The problem is my pharmacist, despite dispensing it to me every single year, cannot prescribe me my steroid cream because it needs to be a GP. Following that, we had COVID. A pharmacist can't give you Paxlovid, so they can't give you the anti-COVID medication. You have to see a GP or you need to see a hospital. And then we've got Strep A, which is the current big bad. And again, we have antibiotics. We have treatments available for it, but again, the pharmacists are referring you back to a GP in a hospital. So it's not that it's a bad idea. Pharmacy first is a good idea, but again, we forgot to actually give the pharmacist any additional tools to say...
Yeah, so it's interesting because you're obviously in a more urban area than I am. I'm in a kind of rural area,
Yeah.
kind of in a rural area, and I think like most things, things are very rarely one size fits all. So actually
Yeah.
live beside our doctors that's not been open for ages. There's another practice in another village, which is
Yeah.
a little bit annoying if I need to go to the doctor. Instead of walking next door, I've got to drive for 15 minutes. But if you live up in the kind of furthest villages up the road from me, you're talking about a 2 hour round trip to get to the doctor. Now, we've got a doctor's surgery that used to have a dispensing pharmacy. And there was a massive public outcry here when somebody tried to open a pharmacy quite a number of years ago, because you couldn't keep the dispensing pharmacy. There was actually a legislation thing within a certain radius. So they had to, anyway, it failed at that point, but it came back a few years later with a much less case, actually. And for some bizarre reason, it's non-professionals, I think, on the panel. I think it was the kind of layperson that kind of was the deciding vote who voted for the pharmacy. So long story short, the doctors is now at risk because of the pharmacy licence. Now the person that did it originally didn't fulfil any of the promises about delivering medication and being open 6 days a week and all the things that they said they were going to do. But we were incredibly lucky that there was a young pharmacist who actually bought it, who is amazing. And without him, I don't know how our local area would have got through COVID. I mean, he really does everything and more, and dispenses stuff, and can actually prescribe some stuff. I think he can prescribe penicillin. I can't take penicillin, but so I've got to get, but he will organise that. I mean, they've got a very good relationship with the GP, and they are trying to manage a very, very big geographic area. With
That sounds like it's how it should be. But why?
a lot of it's down to individuals rather than policy, Graham. That's the problem. It's down to individuals, individual GPs, and how they work with the local pharmacist, and whether if that local pharmacist running a business decided him and his wife are going to emigrate to Australia, we could have nothing within a huge area because they would be in service. It's the same in other villages.
I know a little bit about this. So if you go across the water and you go to South Queensferry, which is near to where I am, if you go into South Queensferry, they have two pharmacies, and I think they're both Lloyd's pharmacies or something. I could have that totally wrong, but I think they're Lloyd's pharmacies. And this comes up in their billboard quite often because Lloyd's pharmacy are short of pharmacists just now, which isn't a great surprise. It's not a Lloyd's confined problem, it's a problem. Yeah. So someone much like what you're saying, like a sole trader or a pharmacist who wants to get in the game but doesn't necessarily want to work for one of these companies. He wants to kind of do it the way he does it. And I think he was working with his wife as well, which is, a good analogue. Maybe we're stealing your pharmacist, who knows? But what they said, they wanted to open they wanted to open a little community pharmacy and do their own thing. But their thing was kind of, well, you ain't going to have a shortage with us because we're always going to be here. And while our hours and such won't increase on the commercial offering, it is a third choice. It's quite reliable. I'm not going anywhere. It's quite predictable. And South Queensferry has these major issues where the pharmacist, is not often a local pharmacist. They're a travelling pharmacist in the sense of one gets kicked round Edinburgh to go and staff a day a week. And they're saying, well, when they're sick or when they're off for Christmas or such, the service is atrocious. And it's funny because Edinburgh Council refused the community pharmacist who presumably lives in the area and just, I think he was winding down his career, but he wanted to do this was his kind of few hours a day. And it's funny, the entire community thought this was a wonderful idea. He thought it was a wonderful idea, and actually the decision makers looked at it and said, actually, we'll keep the commercial pharmacies that actually don't fulfil the agreement that we have in place, and we'll address that. And individuals make, your community pharmacist, you've just said, makes a huge impact in your community. If you could have a decent community pharmacist who can treat, much more than, you've got the cold, well, we have the cold and flu tablets. If we have somebody who's genuinely interested in the health of their community, which comes from being a local, you're going to reduce the burden naturally on the NHS. And I guess the risk is if they overprescribe, we could have a bit of overprescription in the antibiotics, and there might be some reactions, but I think on the balance, there's an awful, decreasing pressure on the NHS has got to be up there now. We've got to try and do that. Which I guess we maybe need to park it here because I don't know if we'll solve the NHS between us tonight. I think we could give it a bash, but it leads us into kind of the rest of the omni shambles, the perma crisis. So ScotRail, I know you joked earlier, but ScotRail are about to go. I don't know if it's ScotRail or Network Rail, or I've lost all sense of who's striking, who's not. But they're about to have a 5-day strike. We've got strikes happening all over. The primary schools are striking in 7 days or something as well. So
and
we've
high
a
school
teacher strike. Well, in Fife they are. Sorry,
and the high school up to 11.
And the high schools. So we've got strikes here, strikes there. Half it's pay, half it's working conditions, half it's they're overloaded. I mean, we're in a bit of a predicament, aren't we?
Yeah, well, you know me in process. I was reading a thing on Twitter it's from RMT, and it was about the maintenance of the line and the maintenance work, and they're looking to half it, like by 50%, right? So they're saying it's going to be 50%, and yet they're saying it's going to be on a risk-based maintenance. Okay,
rather than preventative, yeah.
Well, preventative maintenance is risk-based maintenance. That was my point. It's risk-based in that if you do something in a proactive way, it is usually less expensive, it's got much less risk to safety than waiting for a problem to happen. Or looking at just you talked before about prescribing and how the Scottish Government realised that the cost of administering a system of prescriptions was less than a universal benefit. So it's the same concept. It's like to do this risk-based, if you're risk-basing a whole network, constantly saying, well, which bit, one, you're going to make mistakes, and two, there's a lot of effort goes into that rather than actually just doing preventive maintenance. And, the risk to safety is, severity is exceptionally high. This is like, people trusting, we've all seen, the result of a train crash or like signal failures and stuff. And, there's some events that happen, that's, weather, impacted and different things, and there's always cost of public inquiries to these things and everything. All these things that you try and preventative maintenance and think that that's where cost cutting should be, always comes back to bite you with a bigger cost. Always. Reactive is always more expensive. And I mean more expensive financially, but also potentially in people's lives. And this is what the RMT are actually trying to make that case to the public, because there's very much, the government and a lot of the media are trying to make it as if it's like bah humbug. Oh, he's just moaning again. Oh, the train drivers make X amount of money. Most train drivers are not in RMT. It's mostly like, maintenance workers, people who man the ticket, operators, the conductors on trains, the guards on trains, which again, many, many people have said, particularly seen quite a lot of cases of women on Twitter talking about how they've had really scary experiences on trains and they don't know what they would have done if there hadn't been a train guard to come and actually, resolve the situation. So you're actually potentially making people not want to take public transport, not want to take the train for, fear of safety, both on, the more catastrophic, on the line, or individual personal safety of women not wanting to travel on the train alone, like particularly at night.
Well, we know the end of this though, because we can look at like America, we can look at the New York Metro, the underground in New York, and we can see on TikTok or on YouTube or anything, you can see the sort of general, they're like, oh, I wouldn't ride it after 8 o'clock at night because it becomes a bit of a hellhole. Mm-hmm. And that's because it doesn't have the train conductor, it doesn't have the train guard wandering.
Mm-hmm. It's no governance. It's where everything seems to fall down is, people don't understand the value of something that they can't see or count. And, I used to train on this stuff about proactive maintenance. I won't get into boring technical job stuff, but, a lot of this really is down to, people know Red Adair who put out, oil rig fires, but not the engineer who created the shut-off valve, who probably has saved more lives. People know the reactive is visible. The proactive is actually a bit boring, a bit dull, but it's totally essential. And it's about good governance. Good governance is not something you see. But if it's not there, it's like your house insurance. You don't buy house insurance because you're planning your house to burn down. You buy house insurance because if it ever does, it's what saves you. It's what saves your ability to recover. And this is the big problem. I think there's a real lack of understanding in policy and across different areas of our society. And the people who stand up and try and say, look, there's a problem here, and you talked about like justice, that's another one about legal aid. That might seem quite an innocuous thing. But if you start getting to the stage that people can't afford to work in the law, what does that do to society? Where's justice if people can't get legal aid? And actually, because some of these particularly some of the young lawyers coming out are doing so many hours for such low, hourly rate, why would the brightest and best go into that unless they can afford to? And then you start getting up the ranks of the judiciary. We talked before about the Supreme Court and how it's, largely all white men. But how do you get a diverse judiciary if you don't start off with having a diverse legal body?
There is no shortage of corporate lawyers.
Because
there's money.
Exactly.
So, Alison, where does the money come from? Where are we paying for everything from?
Well,
That's
where
really
we are.
To let all our listeners know, this was not scripted before we came on, so I'm literally just asking Alison live, where is Alison going to fund the whole of Scotland?
Wait to just reach over to my left-hand side. If we're talking about Scotland as it is now in the UK, then, we've talked many times about ultimately and I'm not making any excuses for Scottish Government, by the way, but we are where we are, practically, pragmatically, we are hamstrung by the financial situation we're on at the moment, and the fact that we get a grant back of some of our, the cumulative, income and assets and our efforts. We get a grant back, which we've got to spend within a budget. I think there's a very, very minimum amount of borrowing that can happen. So with those constraints, you can't make radical change. And what Scotland actually needs is radical change. I mean, I was talking to somebody on Twitter today who was still spouting, I think reading between the lines, was a Labour person, but very disparaging about independence, but totally singing from the Thatcher tax and spend hymn sheet. And you're like, I thought you were Labour, really? Do people still do that?
I do there is not that Thatcherism is something that I want to see return, but there is an argument that, Nicola Sturgeon stands up there and says, we're going to tax the people with the broadest shoulders more. And I often sort of roll my eyes because we just redefine who's got the broadest shoulders, and we're now approaching the point that they've effectively fiddled with all the rates as much as they can. That they've now kind of, I think, what is it, the rate, 26,000? And that's the average. I think 26,000 is kind of like the national average salary, and they've decided the people with the broadest shoulders. But I'm sorry, if you define the national average as the broadest shoulders, you've kind of, that means that half the population are in that. Like, they can't.
Yeah.
When people hear the word "let's tax the broadest shoulders," they certainly don't mean midway. And then secondly, they certainly, people are like, well, you can't just tax the top because they'll flee, and that probably is true. There's also not that many of them. So we have to have a look at what other 5 million population companies did. And you know what? It becomes quite clear why we are absolutely not able to fund these things. Because if you look at Ireland joined the European Union, and then Ireland effectively became a multinational, digital haven, and it headquarters, the European headquarters for Apple, for Amazon, for big companies like Vodafone and everything, are all in Ireland. Now, Ireland goes and butts head with the EU all the time about they're not charged enough tax, but I tell you what, Ireland charges enough tax that Ireland is well off. We then look at other countries like Iceland. Iceland went, well, do you know what? We're geostrategically quite an important place. We should have a lot of boats and a big airline, and we can do that sort of thing. And Iceland has created this whole massive economy on the fact that they just have an airport that's kind of bang in the middle of the Atlantic, which is quite useful for all manner of things, and they're not, they don't really get involved in geopolitical fights. So actually, being this great neutral country that sits in the middle of the Atlantic apparently is very good for aviation and shipping. And then we go to Norway, and they went, well, we found oil, and if it's not our oil, we'll create the big rig thing that drills it out. They've got these massive industries, and well, we've got oil, and if we can't have oil, we've got fish, and if we don't have fish, we'll build the kit to either get the fish or the oil. And, they've got these phenomenal ideas. And then it comes to us, and it's a bit like, oh, well, we have a lot of wind, we have a lot of oil, we have a lot of things. We're a stable country, we're a strong democracy, we have good legal understanding, we speak English, we have a lot going for us. And we're like, well, do you know what? Park all that, because we're going to once again go and raid the piggy banks, the people who are earning, and you check your notes and it's the average wage.
Yeah,
like that's no way to get out of it. We're going to have to come up with. It's like you say, we need a radical solution, and this could be the point from the GRR through COVID, through the NHS, through the strikes, through the ineptitude when it comes to our economy. Are the governments just out of steam? So the Tory government's been out of steam for a year and a bit because they got Brexit done. They got the cake they wanted. They're celebrating deals that the Australians are laughing about. The New Zealand people are having a great big party about, because actually we got nothing out of the deal. They won everything they possibly wanted out of it. And then we turn around to the SNP, and they've kind of been told, well, you're not getting independence, and they've run out of steam. Is it time now? And I don't think it's time for the SNP to go away, because I genuinely believe a political party is whoever its leader is. Its leader sets the direction. Is it time we just retire the Sturgeons, the Salmons, the people in these parties? They've done. Do you know what? Let's give them a round of applause and say, you got us this far on, but it's time, for the Kate Forbes, for the Ash Denhams, for the Robert Reeds at Alba and such, to jump in there and say, actually, we're new, we're youthful, we've got all these brand new ideas. And what was his name? Is it James Dyson? The Dyson founder. It's James Dyson, isn't it?
Yeah.
Might be James. Well, Mr. Dyson, I'll call him. Mr. Dyson. He once said that everybody he ever spoke to about his Dyson vacuums and his Dyson hairdryers, which, by the way, are extortionate, and all his kit's extortionate, his bladeless fans and everything extortionate. He said, they told me, you shouldn't do this because it's not how it works and it doesn't do that. And he says, well, there was me. He says, a total naive tinkerer. And he says, and I went in there and I tinkered about with things, and I says, oh, well, that works, and it's quite cool, and it's novel, and it's new. And he says, well, I have this great big company. He says, sometimes you need the naivety of not being experienced to be bold enough to try and do something new. And he said, you end up, and I know a lot of people don't like the Dyson company for something. However, they're a great example of a fantastic, British company that's come up and has designed fantastic products that are worldwide. They're still designed in the UK, and they've kind of bounced forward on the basis of, well, do you know what? We'll give it a bash and we'll do it kind of cool. And I think that, independence and all these problems are struggling with the fact that we've got the same old people sitting in the same old job. I mean, a cabinet reshuffles now is a bit like, well, where's Humza going this week? Where's Shirley Ann going next week? Where's Shona Robison getting? I mean, when Shona Robison is the same answer, like she's going to be the transport minister, she's going to be the economy minister, she's going to be the gender minister now. Like, I'm not putting Shona Robison down at all, because she might be fantastic, but again, how has Humza Yousaf been the solution to 10 different problems, and they're all still here? Like, at some point, we don't need experience. We need absolute bam pottery, naivety, and an outcome focus that says, by the way, our trains are absolutely crap. The way the services run is crap. It's no on time. It doesn't work. We need... I don't know how we explain it, but we need to stop putting the same old people back into the problem and saying, you've never solved anything before, crack at this.
Yeah, do you know what? It's back to the whole thing
Sorry.
about the power, the power of the idiot question, as he used to say. But why? It's like the kids, but why? Why to do that? We don't ask enough questions, and I think this is a big problem with established political power. Is that people assume you've got all the answers, and I completely agree. And I think you kind of paraphrased my wee saying the last time. Can the same old faces make new cases? And, we are no further forward in, the personalities than we were in 2014. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's still there, Alex Salmond's still there, Patrick Harvey's still there. And it's like, have Scotland in 8 years not surfaced new people? And if not, why not? Because I know there are so many talented people across Scotland. But, I keep coming back to, I think we need to look beyond traditional politics, because traditional politics, what I've learned in my brief sojourn into behind the curtain in political parties, is it's very muscle memory. People just do what they're familiar with. And if you really want to look at things in a radical way, and I kind of controversially, I think there's only a few politicians, I would say, and I really mean a few politicians, who genuinely are pretty bold and radical. And I think it doesn't matter what political rosette they wore, they would still be very firmly principled. And when I say principled, I mean focused on doing the right process, like to doing the rigour, to doing the good governance, to thinking things through, and to doing it with the right reasons for on principle rather than on political career. And, we need more of these people. You're talking like, from right back 100 years ago, John McLean, you're talking about, 50 years ago, Jimmy Reid, you're talking about, Mary Barber and the Glasgow Rangers, people who just, they wanted change and they made it happen. And, it's almost like, you start in politics wanting change and you end up wanting power. And once you've got the power, it all becomes about keeping the power. And you're right. For independence is not a transactional election. I don't know how many times I've said this. It's not a transactional election, but my view is political parties only know how to do transactional elections. They don't really understand what happened in 2014. And if there was a proper debrief, and I'm sure the unionists did it, because they've kind of like definitely, learned a lot of stuff that they've done, and they've learned in Brexit, and, they've, retrenched, I'm not saying it's all the same people, but a lot of the kind of establishment have learned how to, how to manage things. And I think that there's a bit of a tsunami coming this year. And all this time's on my side crap from the First Minister. She doesn't control all the cards. She controls very few of them, actually. So you not only have to make sure your house is in order, you have to keep an eye on your opposition and make sure you are covering all the bases and you've gamed all the scenarios. And to announce a party conference that's an emergency in March, in spring, for something that, the general election could be called in spring, for all we know. Do you know what I mean? We don't control these levers.
But who is out there? Who is currently sitting out there? And please comment or tweet us or phone us.
I'm not going to embarrass anybody online, but I do have, a kind of dream team of people that I would love to see. I mean, on one hand, I would love to see them in politics in Scotland, because I believe that they would make a difference. But on the flip side, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, because, the way currently
who's calling on Nicola Sturgeon right now? Who is out there saying Nicola Sturgeon's about to announce another grand plan? I mean, we've had consultation. I mean, the Scottish Government loves a bloody consultation. You have a consultation for the consultation of the analysis. But nobody can be surely sitting at home just now going, do you know what, Nicola Sturgeon's got the answers. Nicola Sturgeon's got the answer to sweet bugger all at this moment in time.
If Nicola had the answers, we would have heard it by now. I mean, 8 years. How have we actually progressed independence? We've talked about this till we're blue in the face, but we really need to this year, I think, start to look at the problem in a different way of Scottish independence, because the thing that I just find so galling is that as a population, we've never been closer. And the people who really built this road for us, through generations have been thought of as, on the edge of politics and doing the hard yards and knocking doors and small victories and getting into double figures was a celebration, never mind getting elected. And then it was like catastrophic, surprise to the establishment that the SNP actually got a seat. They've settled into power without really absorbing why they got power. And if you don't understand why, then you just assume it's for, potentially the wrong reasons. And that can only go so far. And I think Scottish Labour, in our recent history, have shown the results of taking the electorate for granted. And I think that, I don't think Nicola Sturgeon will be there that much longer. I think she looks like somebody who is probably wanting to be away, but I think she wants to be away in her terms. And I don't want to offend anybody, I really don't see any alternatives at the moment, to engage the population. I really think that the best way to engage Scotland is to try and do what worked in 2013-14, and that is peer-to-peer, campaigning. And that isn't to put all the hard yards on independence activists who've really tried and knocked their pan in over the last 8 years to be told when the polls went up that it was because of the politicians, when the polls went down it was because of the Yes movement. I mean, really, that's an abusive relationship. But I really do think.
Absolutely.
But when I say peer-to-peer, that has to be led by something that puts independence on the front pages and on the television, and that is a constitutional convention. That's what happened after the devolution referendum. That people like Isabel Lindsay and that got together and had a constitutional convention and made people interested, and it was credible. It was serious people going through the detail of things and making the unconvinced feel more confident that there was a credibility behind this. And that's teasing out a lot of the things before you stick it on a leaflet and try and convince somebody, at a door. But we talked before about citizens' assemblies for GRR, which I think is a massive missed opportunity. I think citizens' assemblies, participatory democracy in general, should have been normalised by now. And I think GRR would have been a very good one to do, and it would have been very aligned with Ireland's changes. But the only one they've done was so vague and so unreported, and I believe so little of it was actually implemented. It looks like a tick box exercise. It's a toy you got at Christmas, played with once and chucked it over in the corner, where it is actually Scotland's chance to engage the population. Talking to people from the Irish one, it was incredibly empowering for people. So Constitutional Convention and a Citizens' Assembly will put independence on the front page. It will get people talking about it at the dinner table again. That's what we need. It's easy for politicians to tell people from the pulpit, go and have conversations. And it's like, to what end if you won't do anything? Who actually
not going to do anything.
They need to create the catalysts. That's the problem that's not there, that we don't have a solution for at the moment. But the solution is there, they're just not choosing to take it.
Well, we're in our last, we're at 57 minutes, so we're about to finish. So we have to finish, unfortunately. We could talk for days. But here's my question.
Okay.
Here's my question. We're going to finish light, because we always try and finish light here in the Viva Cost podcast. If you could steal a politician from any country in the world, who would you steal? Why would you steal them?
Me? I would definitely steal Mary Lou McDonald. And the reason why is because she literally oozes, confidence and determination. And I think she articulates her very clear message in a communicative way, which leaves no doubt of you. You would not bet against her. And I think a politician you would not bet against is a good politician, because, Ireland have a very complex situation that she has cut straight through and has appealed on many different areas. She's not a traditional Sinn Féin politician. So she has had the battle just to be accepted within Sinn Féin. If you look, through her history, she's more kind of liberal, kind of Labour type person. I think early doors, quite reasonably, affluent area, Dublin, etc. But she has managed to connect with people in a way that I think has been exceptionally powerful. And the whole way she articulates change is happening. it's not up for debate. Change is happening, and the change is up to the people, and the change will be inclusive. I mean, you can rhyme off this stuff because she says it consistently. I could not rhyme off anything Nicola Sturgeon says about independence. I genuinely couldn't. But I could rhyme off all the stuff that Mary Lou McDonald. I think Michelle O'Neill is very good as well, but I have to say, if I was to pick one, it would be Mary Lou McDonald.
What if you could have one from any time in history? Would it change, or is it still the same?
No. I've got quite a few kind of legacy, historic figures. Not an actual politician, but it was involved in politics, would be John McLean. Because I think the reason John McLean was, I mean, we're talking in a very difficult era and a very difficult circumstance. He's very dangerous and actually died as a result of being imprisoned. But John McLean, those people who even know who he is, think of him as being a kind of political activist. But John McLean was an educator. And I think this is a key thing again, that, why I'm saying about participatory democracy, citizen assemblies, constitutional convention. It's about educating people. It's about getting people to raise their heads and actually look at the aspiration and the vision that Scotland can be, and understanding the assets that we have, and being honest about the challenges we've got as well. If you don't look honestly at a situation, then you can't hope to fix it. And I think we need honest politicians, and that is a rarity, I think, in today. I also admire people like Jimmy Reid. I admire Tony Benn as well. I actually think Tony Benn.
Alison, you were asked for one or two, and you're now on about 10. I was telling you, you're really the politician. You've picked a cabinet now.
Obviously, Nelson Mandela as well. A kind of man of principle. There we go. I've got a few women, a few men thrown in to the mix. What about you?
I think. Do you know that mine are all going to be that controversial? People love. I mean, what was it I said in the last podcast? I said that we should make Harry and Meghan the current head of the royal family, and that went down. I mean, we've not had much negative feedback, but that definitely was the most negative we've had for it. And it's always my controversial opinions that do this. Who would I have? Well, if I was being sensible, I like Pete Buttigieg from America. I think Mayor Pete, Secretary Mayor Pete, he's a right boring nerd. Like, he is into the absolute basics of train transport. He is into infrastructure, better highways, really putting highways and motorways where they should be and not disrupting communities. Looking at restorative, transformational infrastructure, like where would a port be useful? Where would an airport be useful? Where would trains be useful? Where is transport terrible? How can we get cars? Like where can we make an impact where people would choose not to drive? Like how do we do that? And do you know what? He is boring, and I know he's boring, and I don't find him boring, but I'm a boring person. So I mean, I think he's fascinating, and I think that the Americans have no idea that he should be their next president. He is absolutely the guy who should be the next president of the United States.
See, I go for the big influence, the influence, and you're going for the soft influence, the actual make a difference, like the kind of tangible difference.
Yeah, I don't think he's offensive. Like, I don't think he's offensive to Republicans either. Well, he is, but he's not in the same sense. He's offensive, but not in the way that they hate Nancy Pelosi just for existing. But he isn't offensive in that way, because they're kind of like, oh, well, here he comes with his trains again, tell him to go away. And then, my other one would probably be, I like American politics. I'm a geek for American politics. I liked Hillary Clinton. I like her sass. I like some of the things she's been involved in. When she was the equivalent of the foreign secretary across there, she was phenomenal. Some of the things that Hillary Clinton, and some of the ceilings that Hillary Clinton broke with nations who, by the way, would sooner have a woman taped to the back wall than have her opinion sitting at the table. She walked into a room, and I think somebody was like, oh, I'm not going to listen to women wear hair on display. And the next day she came in with hair like up and out to be like, well, you will respect what I bring to the table. It's my contribution, and it's the country I represent, not... she really, really impressed me that way, and she was a feminist to her core. I think if I could have either name, I think if I was going, you know, I can't. Historically, there's so many, and you've stolen all the good ones. So I
We can
think that
share.
if I was to pick someone, I think if I'm having some fun for a minute, I quite like the whole. I mean, Aaron Sorkin wrote The West Wing, series 1 to 4,
Yeah.
and he wrote The Newsroom, and that had Will and it had Mackenzie McHale, and then they were fantastic because they were. I always felt that The Newsroom was a really good show, and I always felt Will. He was a conservative and he was a Republican, and he was written in a very interesting manner that was like, you know, I'm a conservative, but at the same time, I have social values. And then I think that if we could see something on like the Sorkin White House, the Sorkin sort of philosophy of, left wing. And he, Sorkin was maybe not a socialist or anything of the sort, but Sorkin's left wing leaning politics. If we could have Josiah Bartlett, President Josiah Bartlett, if we could copy the spirit and essence of him into this country and some of the ideas. And that, I have to give Robin McAlpine and the Commonweal a bit of a wee plug here, and I know you'll support this as well. It's interesting to sometimes hear some of Robin's rants, or I shouldn't call them rants, that's a bit unfair. They're not rants, they're informed, vibrant discussions.
You probably call them that.
Yeah, they're an informed, vibrant discussion. And the interesting thing is when you listen to some of them and you listen to, like, why don't we take control and hand it to the communities and stuff, you can't help, but you don't even have to agree with him. You actually could think this guy is mental. But the enthusiasm and the transference and the responsibility, shifting it from politicians to citizens, is so exciting. So exciting. And I hope that...
Yeah. I was just going to say the difference.
I think that
it's an honest politics. What he says, he actually means. He feels it.
Absolutely.
And he will do the research and he will back it up. And if he thinks he's getting it wrong, he will change his mind. And it's back to what I'm saying about we need more honesty in politics.
And I think that's a phenomenal point for us to end on at an hour and 10 minutes or something, is that we need more honesty in politics, but second, we need the honesty that we've got it wrong. We need the integrity, and we need the inspiration. We need new voices in the room. We need excitement. We need the geeks. We need the fun. We need to get away from this. Oh, they're experienced politicians, so bow down to them. They're absolutely full of rubbish. Monica Lennon is in the Scottish Labour Party, and Monica Lennon has so many good policy proposals she brings forward, and I'm glad some of them are finally starting to come forward, because do you know what, I think the Scottish Labour Party are a talentless, feckless, useless remnant historical cruft in Scotland. However, Monica Lennon's actually a bright light in there that comes up with fairly decent policies. Her own party half the time don't support her, but the Scottish Government should be supporting Monica Lennon these are good ideas. And we need more people like that. We need more geeks. We need more wild people. We need more outside influences. And do you know what? We need to get politics back to being exciting and changeable. And
so all of that is premised on having leadership that actually inspire people rather than try to control and just to get power and personal power. And I think the personality politics that has come over from the US to the UK and to Scotland is what is stopping us actually progressing. And we need to look beyond individuals, because let's be honest, as we said about new faces, to make new cases, then, why would we premise our future on individuals? It's a country. It's not about a party. It's not about individuals. It's about the people of Scotland and conversing and debating and building consensus with people that you don't necessarily agree with. And I think the entrenchment of party politics and the toxicity of the debate has been really, really hostile. And the only way to change that is to demand better and not accept it.
Well, that's the 2023 opening to the Viva Cost podcast. It has been a pleasure, dear listeners and dear viewers, if you're still watching this on YouTube. It has been a genuine pleasure. I am sorry that our content output has been so lacklustre and poor. Wish we had a good excuse. It has been busy, but we have also been lazy. We will fix that we will fix that shortly, and it's your usual reminder that you should absolutely help contribute, and you should submit anything you like. We do usually run everything unedited. It's quite a bit of fun. People disagree with you quite a bit. I'm not the most agreeable person. Alison's slightly more agreeable than I am. I'm not the most agreeable person in the world. It has been a pleasure to host you on this podcast at 1 hour and 10 minutes. I've been Graham. Alison's been Alison. I think that's us. Goodbye and good night.
Good night and good luck.
Something like that.
Edward R. Murrow.